The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Every species knew their place. Every race understood the rules. When a new civilization discovered faster than light travel and joined galactic society, they entered at the bottom. This was the way things had always been done. New species spent their first 500 years in something called observation status. This meant they could not vote on any laws. They could not claim new territory. They had to pay tribute to the elder races who had been in space for thousands of years. The elder races called this system fair. They said it gave young species time to learn. They said it protected everyone from chaos and war. But the truth was simpler and uglier. The system existed because the elder races liked being in charge. They liked receiving tribute. They liked having younger species serve them and obey them without question. Then humanity arrived. Ambassador was 53 years old. She had gray hair that she kept short and practical. She had spent 30 years as a diplomat on Earth, handling the most difficult negotiations between nations. When humanity discovered they were not alone in the universe, she was the obvious choice to represent them. She stood now in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council. The room was enormous, built to make visitors feel small. Crystalline pillars rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Thousands of seats circled the central platform where she stood alone. They filled most of the upper seats. They were beings made of living light, their forms shifting and beautiful. They had been the first species to achieve space travel, and they never let anyone forget it. Below them sat the collective, creatures with hard shells and clicking mandibles. They controlled most of the galaxy's mining operations. They occupied the seats of honor, ancient beings who claimed to have witnessed the birth of stars. 17 other elder races watched from their assigned positions. Below them all, in the lowest and smallest seats, sat the representatives of the younger species, the ones still in observation status, the ones who had no voice. High Speaker of the rose to begin the ceremony. His form blazed with golden light as he began the traditional welcoming recitation. This speech lasted 3 hours. It explained to new species how grateful they should be for being allowed to join galactic civilization. It listed all the rules they would follow. It described the tribute they would pay. It reminded them, again and again, that they were newcomers who must learn their place. Listened for 4 minutes, then she raised her hand. The High Speaker stopped. No one had ever interrupted the welcoming recitation. In 12,000 years, no species had dared. "I am going to stop you there," said. Her voice was calm and clear. It carried across the vast chamber without any effort. The silence that followed was total. Several delegates stopped breathing. An ambassador dropped the data tablet he was holding, and the clatter echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Humanity declines observation status," continued. "We will not pay tribute. We will not give up our territorial claims. We will not wait 500 years to be treated as equals." High Speaker's light flickered rapidly. This was the equivalent of complete shock. "You cannot refuse. This is how it has always been done. This is the law." Smiled, it was not a warm smile. "We have read your laws, all 9 million pages of them. My team spent 2 years studying every word. Do you know what we found?" She paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of eyes and sensors and other organs of perception focused on her. "There is no enforcement mechanism," she said. "No punishment for refusing observation status. No army that will force us to comply. The system works because every species before us has simply accepted it. They assumed they had no choice. They were wrong." An elder rose from his seat. His name was, and he was said to be over 9,000 years old. His voice was like grinding stone. "Young human, you do not understand what you are doing. The elder races have guided this galaxy since before your species existed. We have crushed rebellions. We have ended wars. We have destroyed civilizations that threatened the peace." Turned to face him directly. She did not look away from his ancient eyes. "Then destroy us," she said simply, "if you can." Another silence. This one felt different. This one felt dangerous. "We are a young species," continued. "You are right about that. We have only had space travel for 40 years. We have one colony world and a few mining stations. By your standards, we are nothing." She took a step forward on the platform. "But we did not spend those 40 years preparing to kneel. We spent them preparing for this moment. We studied your technology. We mapped your trade routes. We identified your weaknesses. We made friends with species you dismissed as unimportant, and we asked ourselves one simple question." She looked around the chamber again, meeting the eyes of every delegate she could. "What happens when someone finally says no?" The Queen Admiral rose from her seat. Her mandibles clicked with barely controlled anger. "You speak of war. You would threaten the peace that has lasted." "I speak of truth," replied. "I speak of a system built on submission and fear. I speak of tribute that is really theft. I speak of observation status that is really slavery with a prettier name. Humanity will not participate in this system. We will trade fairly with whoever wishes to trade. We will defend ourselves against whoever attacks us. And we will treat every species as equals, whether this council approves or not." She turned and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. "Wait," High Speaker called out. His light had dimmed to an uncertain flicker. "If you leave now, if you reject the council's authority, there will be consequences. You will be alone. No one will trade with you. No one will protect you." Stopped at the door, she looked back over her shoulder. "Then we will be alone," she said. "We have been alone before. We survived an ice age. We survived plagues and famines and wars with ourselves. We crawled out of the mud and reached for the stars with nothing but our own hands. We did not come this far to bow to anyone." She walked through the door and did not look back again. In the chamber she left behind, 400 species sat in stunned silence. The elder races exchanged worried glances. The younger species, the ones trapped in observation status, sat very still in their small seats at the bottom of the room. But some of them were thinking. Some of them were remembering the words they had just heard. And some of them, for the first time in their lives, were imagining a galaxy where things might be different. The High Speaker called for order. The ceremony continued. The council pretended that nothing important had happened. But everyone in that chamber knew the truth. Something had changed. Something had broken. And no one knew yet what would grow in its place. 3 years passed after humanity walked out of the Galactic Council. The elder races expected the humans to fail. They expected starvation, economic collapse, and a humble return to beg for forgiveness. None of this happened. Instead, humanity thrived. They traded with species the Council had ignored. They built new stations in systems the elder races considered worthless. They shared technology freely instead of hoarding it. And most dangerously of all, they talked. Humans talked constantly. They sent messages and broadcasts across the galaxy. They invited other species to visit their worlds. They asked questions that no one had asked in thousands of years. Questions like, why do we pay tribute, and what happens if we stop, and who decided the elder races should be in charge? They were the first to truly listen. There were an amphibious species from a water world called. They had beautiful blue-green skin and large dark eyes. They were scholars and artists, peaceful and quiet. They had entered the galactic community 487 years ago, which meant they had only 13 years left in observation status. For nearly 5 centuries, they had paid their tribute. They had followed every rule. They had bowed to the elder races and thanked them for the privilege of serving. They were still paying off debt from their first contact with the Council. Their children were born owing money to species they had never met. Ambassador was 200 years old, which was middle-aged for her. She had spent her entire adult life working within the system, hoping that patience and obedience would eventually bring her people equality. Then she attended a human cultural exchange on the colony world of New Geneva. The humans showed her something she had never seen before. They showed her their history. Watched recordings of human revolutions. She saw people marching in streets, demanding rights. She saw speeches about freedom and justice. She saw humans fight against their own governments when those governments became cruel or corrupt. She saw a species that treated anger as a tool rather than a weakness. Onda had been taught that anger was primitive, that civilized species controlled their emotions, that rebellion was chaos and obedience was wisdom, had believed this her entire life. The humans gave her different words, words like righteous and justified and enough. They told her about something called civil disobedience. They told her that sometimes the most moral thing a person could do was refuse to follow an immoral law. Returned to and did something unprecedented. She told her people the truth. She told them about the tribute system and how it was designed to keep young species poor and dependent. She told them about the discovery records, which showed that elder race ships had actually observed the for 300 years before making contact, waiting until they could present first contact as a rescue from a disaster they could have prevented. She told them about other species who had questioned the system and been quietly destroyed. The people did not react with calm acceptance. They reacted with anger. 5 centuries of suppressed frustration erupted across their world. Protests filled the streets of their underwater cities. Workers refused to process tribute shipments. Students demanded access to records that had been kept secret. The council tried to intervene. They sent diplomats to calm the situation. They threatened economic penalties. They reminded them that they were so close to finishing their observation period and that causing trouble now would only extend it. But they were no longer listening to the council. They were listening to each other, and they were listening to humanity. Within 6 months, 14 species still in observation status had formed something called the Coalition of the Voiceless. They shared information. They coordinated protests. They supported each other's economies when the elder races tried to punish them individually. The humans helped them, not with weapons or soldiers, but with something far more dangerous. They helped with ideas. They helped with organization. They helped with the simple, radical notion that things did not have to be this way. The counselor gathered the leaders of the elder races for an emergency meeting. The ancient being had not felt fear in thousands of years. He felt it now. "We must act decisively," the Queen Admiral demanded. Her warriors stood ready. Her ships filled entire star systems. "We crush this rebellion before it spreads further." "And prove the humans right," replied. "They call us tyrants and oppressors. If we respond with military force, we confirm everything they have said about us." "Then what do you suggest?" High Speaker asked. His light was dim and troubled. "We cannot simply allow this to continue. The system is unraveling." Was quiet for a long moment. He was remembering the early days of the council, when the elder races had first come together. He remembered the wars that had nearly destroyed them all. He remembered why the tribute system had been created in the first place. "The system was built on compliance," he finally said. "Every species that joined the council accepted their position because they believed they had no choice. They believed we were too powerful to resist. They believed resistance was impossible." He looked at the other leaders with ancient eyes. "The humans have shown them that resistance is possible. They have not fired a single weapon. They have not conquered a single world. They have simply refused to comply, and that refusal has done more damage than any army could." "Then we must make them comply," the Queen Admiral insisted. "How?" asked. "Our entire system of control depends on willing participation. We have enforcers, yes, but those enforcers come from observation status species. They serve us to work off their tribute debt. What happens when they start asking why they should continue serving?" No one had an answer. In the lowest levels of the council station, In the quarters assigned to observation status delegates, representatives from 30 species were meeting in secret. They were sharing stories. They were making plans. They were discovering that they had more in common with each other than they did with the masters they had served for centuries. A delegate, a being of living crystal, spoke words that would soon spread across the galaxy. The humans asked what happens when someone finally says no. Now we know the answer. Everything changes. The other delegates nodded in agreement. Some of them were afraid. All of them were determined. The council had stood for 12,000 years. It had weathered wars and plagues and disasters that destroyed entire star systems. But it had never faced an enemy like this one. It had never faced an idea. And ideas, as the humans had proven, were very hard to kill. The Centennial Concord was the most important gathering in galactic society. Every 100 years, representatives from every species came together to celebrate the peace and prosperity that the Council had created. The elder races gave speeches about their benevolent guidance. The younger species expressed their gratitude. Everyone pretended the system was fair and good. This year, humanity requested permission to speak. The council debated for 3 days. Some wanted to refuse. Others saw an opportunity. If the humans spoke at the Concord and made fools of themselves, it would undermine their growing influence. If they said something offensive, it would justify punishment. Either way, giving them a platform seemed like a way to regain control of the situation. They granted the request. Ambassador arrived at the Concord wearing a simple gray suit. She carried no weapons, no guards, no visible technology. She looked small and ordinary compared to the towering and the glowing and the armored. This was intentional. She walked to the central platform and looked out at the assembled representatives of 400 species. The chamber was even larger than the one where she had first rejected observation status. Billions of beings across the galaxy were watching through broadcast systems. "Thank you for allowing me to speak," began. Her voice was calm and steady. "I know many of you expected me to come here and insult the council, or make threats, or demand changes." She paused. "Instead, I would like to present some historical documents." A murmur rippled through the crowd. High speakers shifted uneasily. This was not what they had expected. Touched a control on her wrist. Screens throughout the chamber flickered to life. The council technicians tried to shut them down and discovered that they could not. Human engineers had upgraded the communication system 6 months ago as a gesture of goodwill. Now everyone understood why. The first document appeared on every screen. It was a trade agreement between the signed 480 years ago. It looked ordinary at first glance, but highlighted certain passages and explained what they really meant. This clause here requires them to sell their primary export, medical algae, exclusively to traders. This clause sets the price at 1/10 of the galactic average. This clause automatically renews the agreement every 50 years unless both parties agree to change it. They have been losing billions in potential trade for 5 centuries. They did not understand what they were signing because no one explained it to them. The delegation stared at the screen in horror. Several of them began to weep. Continued. Document after document appeared. Trade agreements that were really debt traps. Protection treaties that gave elder races control over military development. Mining rights sold for tiny fractions of their value to species who did not yet understand what they owned. Then the documents became darker. This is a communication between collective leadership and a biological research station. It is dated 312 years ago. His voice remained steady, but her eyes were hard. It discusses the release of a pathogen on the plague killed 30 million people. The needed cheaper labor for their mining operations. Sick and desperate populations are easier to exploit. The Queen Admiral rose from her seat. Her mandibles clicked with fury. This is a fabrication, lies spread by enemies of peace. The communication includes genetic sequences for the pathogen, replied. They match exactly with samples that scientists preserved from that time. The plague did not occur naturally. It was designed. The ambassador stood slowly. Her name was. Her grandmother had died in that plague. She looked at the Queen Admiral with eyes that held 400 years of grief. You killed them, said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent chamber. You killed 30 million of my people to save money. The Queen Admiral tried to respond, but was already showing the next document, and the next, and the next. Medical patents that they had for centuries, while preventable diseases killed millions. Assassination orders against political leaders who questioned the tribute system. Surveillance records showing that the elder races monitored every communication of every observation status species. Plans to extend observation periods for any species that showed too much independence. Each document was translated into every language in the chamber. Each one was with data that could not be faked. Each one revealed another piece of the truth that had been hidden for thousands of years. The elder races tried to stop the presentation. They called for adjournment. They demanded that be removed. But the screens would not turn off and the broadcast would not stop, and the truth kept pouring out into the light. After 2 hours finally stopped. She looked out at the chamber. Some delegates were crying. Some were shouting in anger. Some sat in stunned silence as everything they had believed collapsed around them. This is who rules you, said. This is the benevolent guidance you have been thanking them for. This is the peace that cost 30 million lives and billions of credits stolen from every young species and centuries of suppressed potential and crushed dreams. She stepped down from the platform. You have a choice now. You can pretend you did not see this. You can go back to your worlds and continue paying tribute and bowing to masters who see you as nothing more than resources to be exploited. Or you can do something different. She walked toward the exit as chaos erupted behind her. The delegation stood and followed her. Then a dozen more. Species who had spent centuries in silent submission rose from their seats and walked out of the chamber. 53 species left the Centennial conquered that day. By nightfall, the number had reached 107. By the end of the week, more than half of all observation status species had formally suspended their participation in the Council. The coalition of the voiceless had become a coalition of the furious. High Speaker called an emergency session. Counselor demanded military action. The Queen Admiral screamed for blood and vengeance. But there was no one left to listen. The younger species were busy talking to each other. They were sharing more documents that human intelligence operatives had gathered. They were making plans. They were building something new. And sat in a small room on a human station, watching the galaxy she had helped set on fire, and allowed herself a small smile. The hard part was over. Now came the harder part, surviving what came next. The emergency summit took place aboard the Eternal Mandate, the largest warship in the fleet. Counselor had chosen this location deliberately. He wanted to remind everyone of the military power the elder races still commanded. The leaders of the 6 most powerful elder species gathered in the war room. Holographic displays showed fleet positions across the galaxy. Thousands of warships stood ready. Millions of soldiers awaited orders. The elder races had spent 12,000 years building the most powerful military force in galactic history. The humans have humiliated us, the Queen Admiral said. Her voice was cold with barely controlled rage. They have turned our subjects against us. They have revealed secrets that should have stayed buried. This cannot go unanswered. Direct military action against Earth would be a mistake, replied. They have prepared for that possibility. Our intelligence suggests they have defensive systems we do not fully understand. Then we do not attack directly, High Speaker said. His light was dim but focused. We strangle them, cut them off from all trade, block their access to fuel and raw materials, Quarantine their colonies. Let them starve in the dark until they beg for forgiveness. The other leaders considered this. It was elegant. It was deniable. It avoided the appearance of military aggression while accomplishing the same goal. "And the coalition?" asked Lord of a species of massive armored beings who controlled most of the galaxy's shipping lanes. "The younger species who have joined the humans." "They will learn that rebellion has consequences," replied. "When they see what happens to humanity, they will remember their place." The decision was made. The announcement was broadcast across the galaxy at 600 Galactic Standard Time. All trade with human colonies was forbidden. Any ship carrying human goods would be seized. Any species that continued to deal with humanity would face the same restrictions. The elder races expected terror. They expected panic. They expected humanity to realize they had made a terrible mistake. By 800, they realized they were the ones who had miscalculated. The first ships to break the blockade carried flags. They emerged from jump points the Council had never mapped, following routes that should not have existed. They carried human food and medicine and technology to colonies that were supposed to be isolated. Council ships moved to intercept, but before they could fire, more ships arrived. Ships. Vessels from a dozen species that the elder races had dismissed as insignificant for centuries. "They cannot do this," the Queen Admiral sputtered as reports flooded in. "Those species have no military capability. They are nothing." "They were nothing," corrected quietly. He was studying the tactical displays with growing concern. "They are something else now." Humanity had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. While the elder races had dismissed them as primitives, the humans had been building, not warships or weapons, but something far more valuable. They had been building relationships. Human engineers had helped upgrade their ships. Human traders had established exchange networks outside Council control. Human diplomats had quietly visited hundreds of worlds, asking a simple question: "What do you need and how can we help you get it?" The answer was almost always the same. The younger species needed trade partners who did not exploit them. They needed technology that was not locked behind tribute payments. They needed allies who treated them as equals rather than servants. Humanity provided all of these things. And now, when the elder races tried to isolate humanity, they discovered that humanity was not alone at all. But the true genius of humanity's response was not military or economic. It was a message. Ambassador appeared on every screen and every broadcast system in the galaxy. The elder races tried to block the transmission. They failed. Human hackers had spent years preparing for this moment. "The elder races have announced an embargo against humanity," said. Her voice was calm and measured. "They hope to starve us into submission. They hope that watching us suffer will frighten the coalition into obedience." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "Ask yourselves something. If they will do this to humanity for telling the truth, what will they do to you? If they will try to starve innocent people because we refuse to kneel, how will they treat you when you finally stand up?" The message spread across the galaxy faster than light. Species that had been wavering made their decisions. Some chose to stay with the Council, too afraid of consequences to risk rebellion, but far more chose the other path. Within 3 days, they announced they would not enforce the blockade. Lord had done the math. His species controlled the shipping lanes, but the ships that used those lanes increasingly belonged to coalition species. Enforcing the embargo meant war with half the galaxy. Within a week, the formally from the Council. They were followed by and 37 other species. The coalition of the Furious had become something larger, something the elder races had never faced. Within 11 days, the embargo collapsed entirely. 3 elder race species quietly announced they would resume trade with humanity. They had looked at the numbers. They had counted the coalition's growing fleet. They had realized a simple truth. For the first time in galactic history, the younger species outnumbered the elder ones, not just in population, but in ships and resources and determination. The power that the elder races had held for 12,000 years had been an illusion. It had only existed because everyone agreed to believe in it. Now no one believed anymore. Counselor stood alone on the observation deck of the Eternal Mandate. He watched the stars that his ancestors had once ruled without question. He thought about the empire they had built and the crimes they had committed to build it. A young officer approached hesitantly. "Counselor, the other leaders are requesting your presence. They wish to discuss military options." Was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the wars that would follow if they chose that path. He thought about the billions who would die. He thought about whether the elder races could even win such a war anymore. "Tell them I will come shortly," he finally said. "But tell them also to begin considering other options. I do not think we can win this by force." The officer looked shocked. "Counselor, we ruled because others believed we were strong enough to rule," said slowly. "The humans have shown them that our strength was always borrowed. We cannot take back what we have lost by threatening to destroy it." He turned away from the stars. "We must find another way, or we must accept that our time of dominance has ended." The officer left to deliver the message, remained alone with his thoughts and his doubts, and the slowly dawning realization that everything was about to change. 1 year had passed since the embargo failed. The galaxy had changed more in those 12 months than it had in the previous 1,000 years. The old council still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. They had withdrawn to their core worlds, their pride shattered by the revelations of their crimes. The collective had fractured into 3 warring factions as different hives blamed each other for the disaster. Several smaller elder races had quietly joined the coalition, hoping to position themselves on the winning side. Only the remained truly powerful among the old guard, and even they were divided. Younger had read the documents that humanity had revealed. They had learned about the plagues and assassinations and thefts that their ancestors had committed. Many of them felt something their elders had never permitted. They felt shame. The new Galactic Assembly met for the first time in a station that humanity had built. It floated at the intersection of 3 major trade routes, neutral ground that belonged to no single species. The design was intentionally different from the old council chambers. Instead of rising tiers that put some delegates above others, everyone sat on the same level. Instead of towering architecture meant to intimidate, the space was open and welcoming. 312 species had sent representatives. Some had been elder races. Some had spent centuries in observation status. Some were entirely new, species that the old council had discovered but never contacted because they were deemed insufficiently useful. Ambassador sat among the human delegation. She was not at the center of the room. She was not on a platform. She was simply one representative among many, exactly as she had always insisted humanity should be. The first speaker was of the. She had become one of the leaders of the coalition, a symbol of the younger species who had risen up against their oppressors. She stood at a simple podium and looked out at the assembled delegates. "1 year ago, many of us were afraid," she began. "We had lived our entire lives under the rule of the elder races. We had been taught that this was the natural order. We had been told that obedience was wisdom and rebellion was chaos. We believed these things because we had never been shown anything different." She paused. Then the humans arrived. They were not stronger than the elder races. They were not older or wiser or more advanced. They were simply willing to say what many of us had only whispered in secret. The system was unfair. The tribute was theft. The observation status was slavery. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. These words had once been dangerous to speak. "The humans did not save us," continued. "They did not fight our battles or solve our problems. They showed us that we could save ourselves. They reminded us that we had always had the power to say no. We had simply forgotten how to use it. She stepped back from the podium. Ambassador was invited to speak next. Walked to the front of the room. She looked older than she had 4 years ago. The work of building a new galactic order had taken its toll, but her eyes were still sharp and her voice was still steady. "I want to make something clear," she said. "Humanity did not do this alone. We could not have done it alone. What happened in this galaxy was not a human victory. It was a victory for every species that refused to accept injustice. It was a victory for every individual who looked at the way things had always been done and said that things could be different." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of worlds. The old council fell because it was built on lies. It depended on younger species believing they had no choice. Once that belief was broken, the entire structure collapsed. We did not tear it down. We simply told the truth, and the truth did the rest. The next speaker was Counselor of the. His presence had been controversial. Many coalition species had not wanted any elder race representatives at the new assembly, but had been one of the first to accept that the old system could not be saved. He had worked with the coalition to negotiate peaceful transitions of power across dozens of worlds. The ancient being moved slowly to the podium. He was over 9,000 years old, and he had spent most of that time believing in the righteousness of his people's rule. The past year had forced him to reconsider everything. "I will not ask for forgiveness," said. His voice was heavy with age and regret. "The crimes of my people cannot be forgiven. Millions died because of our greed and our arrogance. Billions suffered under a system we created to serve ourselves." He paused. "I can only offer a promise. The who remain in this assembly will work to build something better. We will share the knowledge we hoarded for. We will pay reparations to the species we harmed. We will accept whatever judgment this assembly decides we deserve." He looked at. "The humans taught us something we should have learned long ago. Power that is not shared is power that will eventually be taken. We chose to hoard our power and we lost it. Perhaps if we had chosen differently, we would not be standing here today as the defeated remnant of a fallen empire." He stepped back from the podium. The assembly continued for 3 more days. They debated laws and treaties and structures for the new galactic order. They argued about reparations and justice and how to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. They disagreed on many things, but they agreed on the most important thing. Above the main entrance to the assembly hall, they carved a simple message in 17 languages. No species above another. No voice silenced. No crime forgotten, but every hand extended. On the last day, stood on an observation deck and watched ships from 100 worlds move through space. They were trading and exploring and cooperating, not because an empire forced them to, but because they chose to. A diplomat approached her. It was looking tired but happy. "How did you know it would work?" asked. "When you first stood before the council and refused observation status, when you were just one small species against an empire that had lasted, how did you know?" Considered the question for a long moment. "I did not know," she finally admitted. "I hoped, I believed, but I did not know." She turned to look at. "Humanity has a long history of fighting against unfair systems. Sometimes we won. Sometimes we lost. But we learned something important along the way. Every system that depends on people believing they have no choice is vulnerable, because sooner or later, someone always chooses differently." Nodded slowly, "And when they do, everything changes," said. "Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes if we work hard enough and believe strongly enough and refuse to give up, it changes for the better." She looked back out at the stars. The old council ruled for 12,000 years. This new assembly might last longer, or it might not. What matters is that we try. What matters is that we built something based on cooperation instead of coercion. What matters is that every species in this galaxy now knows they have a choice. Ships continued to move through the darkness. Lights flickered on distant stations. Somewhere out there, new species were taking their first steps toward the stars, and they would find a galaxy that welcomed them as equals instead of conquering them as subjects. Humanity had not saved the galaxy. They had simply reminded it what was possible. And that had been enough.